Hi, I'm Robert Horton, here to welcome you again to another episode of Scarecrow Academy and Pandemic Hair. I'm a member of the National Society of Film Critics and the Programmer Historian in Residence at Scarecrow Video. I've also been leading this Scarecrow Academy for 2020, which we called The Art in Horror, Horror and the Director. And we want to invite you to join us for our next class. We will meet online on Saturday, November 14th at 2 p.m. Pacific Time for a discussion of the 1999 film Ravenous. To register for the session, please click on the appropriate link on the Scarecrow Academy webpage. You will be sent an invitation as well as information on how to watch the film. Ravenous was directed by Antonia Bird, an English filmmaker. The movie began life as an original screenplay that sort of distinguishes it from some of the other films that we've talked about during this series, most of which have been literary adaptations. Ravenous was an original by Ted Griffin, who went on to write the first Ocean's 11 movie, that is to say, the first movie in the reboot of Ocean's 11, directed by Steven Soderbergh and with George Clooney. He also happens to be the grandson of one of those Hollywood directors who made dozens and dozens of films during the golden age of Hollywood, William Sighter, guy who started in the silent era, did everything, worked with Laurel and Hardy, Astaire and Rogers, Marx Brothers, and Shirley Temple, and eventually ended up doing TV in the 1950s, had a long, long career. So Ravenous was started life with a different director, actually. When the movie started shooting, the director was Milcho Manchevsky, a Macedonian filmmaker who had won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in 1994 for his film Before the Rain, a very interesting, quirky Balkan movie. He had disagreements with the producers in the studio on Ravenous, and so after 3 weeks, they fired him. One of the cast members, there's also an interesting story about, I think there was another director brought in just for a few days. Maybe we'll get into that. Turned out to be a disaster. We might get into that during our session. Robert Carlyle, one of the cast members of Ravenous, had worked with Antonia Bird on some projects in England, and he suggested that she come on. She had read the screenplay sometime before that and liked it and so knew the material. So she came on with almost no time to prep or rehearse and shot film and apparently put some things back into the screenplay that had been taken out of it at some point, among other things. Some of Bird's work in Britain, often created for British TV, looked at social issues, homelessness, addiction, in her 1994 film Priest, which actually got a legitimate US release and distribution, the problems of sexuality and cover-up in the Catholic Church. So she'd been noticed by Hollywood. She had already made a Hollywood film, 1995, I think, Mad Love, which is kind of a young lovers on the run story with Drew Barrymore and Chris O'Donnell, set in Seattle. And that film is one of those clearly interfered with studio movies. It's neither this and not that. And it was an unhappy experience for the director. Ravenous itself was badly distributed. It was not a financial success, but over the years it has gathered, I think, a fairly strong cult following. It has a lot of the qualities of a classic cult film. Wild swings in tone, lots of gore, lots of humor. It's got brilliant actors and sort of memorable, odd, quotable dialogue. It has a pointed political subtext that at times pokes out and becomes text. And above all, it's really, really weird. It also has an ingenious musical score by the team of Michael Nyman and Damon Albarn. Nyman being one of the leading modern classical composers and known in the movies for his work in the early films of Peter Greenaway, for instance. Maybe most famously for his score for Jane Campion's The Piano. Albarn was the leader of the great 90s British rock band Blur. I don't often go out to buy soundtrack albums myself, but when I saw Ravenous in 1999, I immediately went to an ancient place called Tower Records, probably, and bought the CD of Ravenous back when people did things like that. And it is really an interesting musical score. So in our session, we'll talk about some scenes or moments from the film that make it distinctive, those touches that show you that a director has a particular way of seeing and a unique approach to films. One thing we might touch on is the idea of a female director who looks at a group of men in close quarters and casts perhaps a skeptical eye in that direction. The close quarters in this case being a remote army outpost in the 19th century on the American frontier. One of Bird's most distinctive sequences is a climactic hand-to-hand battle between the characters played by Robert Carlyle and Guy Pearce. Instead of having the stunt expert come in and arrange the scene, according to Robert Carlyle, Bird had the actors create this sort of miserable mano-a-mano between themselves that looks really, really unheroic and very, very gritty. All the actors in this movie, by the way, led by Carlyle and Guy Pearce, are really at their best. It's a very odd group. Jeremy Davies, David Arquette, Neil McDonough, Jeffrey Jones, John Spencer, all the way down the line. A very odd but very effective group of actors. We might also note that Ravenous is part of a relatively small crossover genre, the horror western, to say nothing of the even narrower horror western comedy, if you accept it as a comedy, which is another way of saying that this movie creates something unique unto itself. It's a one-of-a-kind thing that hasn't quite been approximated since. Unfortunately, Antonia Bird died at age 62 of cancer in 2013. Ravenous is only one part of her career, but even just based on this, you can see that there's enough in it to show how singular her talent must have been. When I reviewed the movie in 1999, I finished by telling my readers, you have fair warning. So if you're going to watch Ravenous this week, get ready for something bloody and strange, and we hope you feel moved to talk about it during this week's Scarecrow Academy. See you then.